outsizing the threat from China. In 2020, when a chairman of an intelligence committee misrepresented that a laptop owned by then candidate Biden's son was somehow a Russian intelligence operation, and 51 former intelligence officials used the imprimatur of IC authority to go along with that, I stood in the breach. I stood alone and told the American people the truth about that. So I think my record in terms of speaking truth to power and defending the intelligence community and its good work is very clear. And what I can assure you is those types of instances, if I'm in that position as CIA director and have to do that again, as uncomfortable as that can be, to be accused, you know, the truth will ultimately defend itself, and I think that that intelligence will as well.
And the truth will defend itself, even if that truth is counter to the views of a current administration. It will, at the end of the day, it has to be back to the truth. I've got time for one last question. As you well know, our intelligence community is the best in the world, but we also receive enormous amounts of benefit from our partners around the world. We've got to make sure, and obviously the president has the right to declassify information, but we've seen that willingness to declassify in advance of Putin's brutal attack on Ukraine used effectively. But as we think about that declassification, particularly if it's done below the presidential level, making sure we consider the sources and methods of our allies, there's no requirement that intelligence is shared. It is based on a trust relationship. I'd like you to briefly speak to making sure that we maintain that trust relationship with the very valuable information we see from our allies and partners around the world.
Well, I agree completely. As DNI, I was able to experience what you just said. We do have the best intelligence enterprise in the world, but we have great partners around the world that we work with to do great things to improve not just our national security posture, but theirs. And that is reliant upon mutual trust and respect for intelligence sharing between intelligence agencies. And as CIA director have confirmed, I'll understand that improving our national security posture and protecting the American people will be absolutely dependent upon maintaining those relationships and maintaining that trust.
Thanks, Jim.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. For the past 9 years at least, anomalous health incidents, also known as the Havana Syndrome, have been a serious and persistent problem within the intelligence community. At first, there was a robust effort to investigate the cause of these incidences and to support the possible victims. Along with the other senators on this committee, I was one of the authors of the Havana Act to ensure that there was funding available for those who had been afflicted. However, more recently, support for both investigative analysis and for victims within the CIA have decreased. Then we've had some interesting developments. On December 5th, the House Committee on Intelligence released an unclassified report finding that there was an increasing likelihood that a foreign adversary was responsible for at least some of the reported AHI cases. Then on the 10th of January, the ODNI released an updated intelligence assessment of AHIs that revealed that 2 intelligence agencies reported that they believed a foreign actor may have used some sort of novel weapon or prototype device to inflict AHIs on our personnel. This is very disturbing to me. It raises questions of whether dissenting voices were suppressed in earlier analyses And my basic question to you is this: what actions, if confirmed, will you take to ensure that the CIA aggressively and objectively investigates the causes of AHIs, including examining whether or not a foreign adversary is responsible for harming the men and women who are serving our country?
Senator Collins, thank you for the question. And I want to start by saying I enjoyed the chance to visit with you. And as you recall, we talked about this issue from my perspective 4 years ago when I was the Director of National Intelligence, and you were as concerned then as you are now about this issue, along with Senator Rubio. And I asked then CIA Director Haspel to look into the issue 4 years ago. Having stepped away, I share your frustration that 4 years later, we're very much in the same place in terms of trying to make an assessment and determination on the cause of this. And I share your frustration in not being able to understand why, but if confirmed and have the opportunity to be briefed on all of the assessments and intelligence, my pledge to you is that I will drill down and look carefully at that issue and work with you to see. I read the unclass report, the House report, and the unclassified version of the intelligence community assessment. I have not had access to my understanding, very lengthy classified report, but I look forward to drilling down on that because, as I talked about in my opening, the workforce has been affected by this, and it has affected their morale because of this. And it's why I highlighted that. And so, the cause of it is one point, but the care of the CIA workforce has been affected is another. But they're equally important to me. So my pledge is to look into it, but to work with you to try and. Obviously, we need to know if we have an adversary that is using a weapon against our people, and I look forward to my ability to look at that intelligence for myself.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with you. I have very little time left. The chairman mentioned that the intelligence community, for which I have the greatest respect, has had some significant misjudgments lately. For example, there was a misjudgment of how long the Afghan government would stand after the United States' hasty and ill-advised withdrawal. The IC missed early assessments on Ukraine's willingness to fight, projecting incorrectly how quickly the Russians would be able to take Kyiv. They did not warn or predict of the Hamas mass attack against Israel. The IC was surprised at South Korea's martial law declaration, nor did they predict the rapid collapse of the Syrian regime. My question to you, and I know the IC is not going to get it right every time, but when there is a pattern, or even when there's a miss, what should the IC do to review why these major intelligence changes were not identified or predicted?
Well, thank you, Senator. It's what I talked about, I think, in response to Chairman Cotton's question about this, is that the intelligence community isn't always going to get it right, hasn't always gotten it right, but we've had too many instances where you all as policymakers are finding out by watching news reports about some of these things that I think can be, in some cases at least, fairly characterized as intelligence failures or lapses. We talk about what can we do, what do we need to do. Part of it is a technical thing in terms of improving our collection, addressing ubiquitous technical surveillance. And I know I haven't been fully briefed on this, but I am impressed by some of the things that, for instance, the Directorate of Science and Technology is doing to help us solve for X with regard to operating as human sources in an environment of UTS. But I also think a bigger part of this that I'm going to focus on, Senator, is to look at what's happening in terms of the focus and execution on core mission. Better, as I said, good decisions are hostage to good information, and we all know that the human intelligence collection isn't where it needs to be. And so looking at the reasons why we've lost our focus there, and some of those things are, if you have a politically motivated, bureaucratically imposed social justice agenda that takes up part of your attention, that can distract from the core mission of collecting human intelligence that matters and providing it to you in a timely way. So my pledge to you is that I'm every bit as concerned, and I don't want those intelligence failures or lapses to happen on my watch, and will do everything that I can to make sure that it doesn't.
Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe, for the thorough answer. I know that you would be thrilled to stay here all day long to answer our questions. But the colleagues, let's try to move it along. I know there's at least 4 or 5 other hearings going. Many of you have to get to those hearings, so let's try to move quickly and stick to the 5-minute limit. We'll have a chance to question Mr. Ratcliffe and close hearing, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer your questions for the record as well. Senator King.
I'm hoping that quantum computing might solve the problem of having to be 3 places at once here at these hearings. I first want to acknowledge a new senator at the end of the dais, Senator Young. Welcome him to the committee. I'm very pleased that he's joining us, and I know he'll make a great contribution. Mr. Ratcliffe, congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome. And it seems to me that you have an initial task that's a little unusual, but also very important, and that is to restore the confidence of the president-elect in the intelligence community. Before you can deliver the information that he needs to know, you need to get him to a place where he does have confidence in the judgments that are coming to him, and he's notoriously skeptical of the intelligence community, and being skeptical is not necessarily a bad thing, but I hope that's one of the first things that you can work with him on, is to make him receptive to the information and the truth that you will be providing as a result of your position.
Well, thank you, Senator. I think one of the reasons that I have this opportunity for you all to consider me for confirmation is because President Trump knows and wants me to lead with integrity, wants me to carry out the duties of the CIA as a director, to follow the law and authorities as far as it will go and no further, to protect America's national security interests.
I think that confidence that he has in you is an important asset. I just suggest rebuilding his confidence in the community is an important task. Let me move forward. Everybody's talked about telling the truth to power. Dan Coates, one of your predecessors at DNI, put it, I think, most succinctly and persuasively. He said the mission of the intelligence community is to find the truth and tell the truth. I think that's a very good way to look at it. And we haven't talked much here today about why that's so important. I recently reread David Halberstam's book, The Best and the Brightest, a comprehensive history of Vietnam. It's heartbreaking about the intelligence failures and, frankly, intelligence manipulation that led to a great deal of that tragedy. So that's why it's so important, because skewed intelligence can equal lives lost. And you've already committed. I won't make you say so again, but I think you understand how important this is.
I do.
4 years ago, I asked you a series of yes and no questions. You answered them all correctly. I'd like to run through them once more very briefly. Would you ever ask, encourage, or support an intelligence professional adjusting his or her assessment to avoid criticism from the White House or political appointees?
No.
Would you ever change or remove content in an intelligence assessment for political reasons or at the behest of political leadership?
No.
Would you consider an individual's personal political preferences to include loyalty to the president in making a decision to hire, fire, or promote an individual?
No.
And do you commit to exclusively consider professional qualifications in IC personnel decisions without consideration of partisan or political factors?
Yes.
If you were to receive credible evidence as director of the CIA that an individual was undermining objectivity and furthering a political agenda in the intelligence community, would you remove or discipline that person?
Yes.
Will you or any of your staff impose a political litmus test for CIA employees?
No.
Finally, if confirmed, will you reassure your workforce that loyalty tests are not allowed and not encouraged in the CIA?
I will.
Those were exactly the answers that you gave before. Thank you. One other a brief question. I believe that you are the author of an important statute on cyber security, and I've done extensive work in that area myself. I believe that one of the great failings in national policy is the lack of a cyber deterrent strategy, that our adversaries, particularly China, feel that they can attack our telecommunication system, our electrical system, or whatever with impunity. Do you believe that it would serve the national interest to develop a declaratory cyber deterrent strategy similar to the strategy that underlies the rest of our national defense posture?
I do, Senator, and I know we share a similar view on, the threat from cyber. There's so much focus on the integrity, the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders. But as you well know, it's invasion through our digital borders from half a world away in a few seconds and a few keystrokes that can cause.
And it's happening every day.
So much damage, and the deterrent effect has to be that there are consequences to our adversaries when they do that. One of the things that I hope to do, if confirmed as CIA director, is to work on the development of the types of tools that will be effective in allowing us to do those things. The deployment of those capabilities, of course, would be a policy decision for others to make, but I would like to make sure that we have all of the tools necessary to go on offense against our adversaries in a cyber means.
Thank you very much. I hope you will advocate that in the councils of the national security apparatus of the administration. Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe. I appreciate your testimony.
Senator Langford.
John, Michelle, thank you for being here. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for your sacrifice and what you have already done to be able to serve the nation. We really appreciate that. It is a tremendous sacrifice to serve in the intelligence community. As my wife has said to me a couple of times, we share everything about everything and talk about life together, but there's now a portion of my life I can't talk about with her serving the Intelligence Committee. You've had even more of that serving as ODNI. And so thanks for y'all's sacrifice to be able to serve. I've got several questions I want to be able to run through quickly on this. There are a group of folks in Oklahoma City, I can't name who they are because they're alive, but their lives were threatened on Election Day by an ISIS terrorist in Oklahoma City that was discovered initially by a 702. That 702 authority is important. There are people in my neighborhood that are alive today because of that 702 authority. Now, you've been outspoken on this. It has been much maligned in many ways on it, but it has been vital for intelligence collection around the world. What is your position on 702 authority?
Thank you, Senator Langford, for the sentiment and for the question. FISA, and particularly Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, is an indispensable national security tool. There's no other way to get around that. I say that not as a matter of opinion, but as an informed judgment, as in my role as the Director of National Intelligence, being the President's principal intelligence advisor, advising the President in the Oval Office, and understanding that a significant percentage, sometimes more than half, of the actionable foreign intelligence that we provide to the President as the policymaker to act as Commander-in-Chief comes from FISA-derived or 702-derived action. I will say I have supported FISA in that regard, but I've also, as I outlined earlier, understand that it is an important, indispensable tool, but one that can be abused, right, and that we must do everything we can to make sure that it has the appropriate safeguards, because it can't come at the sacrifice of Americans' civil liberties. So I have supported those reforms and called out those abuses when they have taken place.
I think the best way to be able to do that is by actually enforcing those that have abused it, that they're actually called out, and accountability is held for those individuals so everyone knows this is an indispensable tool. Don't abuse it. And I think that becomes very clear. You have mentioned in your testimony We cannot ignore CIA's critical counter-narcotics and counterterrorism missions in support of border security efforts. I think few Americans understand just south of our border is one of the most violent areas of the world. Today, there are murders, beheadings, there are aerial bombardments with one cartel fighting within itself for leadership happening right now. It is an incredibly violent area just south of our border, not to mention the thousands of Americans that die with the narcotics that they pump into the United States, and they destabilize our economy and our families. That's a critical role for us in our national security. How do you perceive that?
Well, and it also ties in, Senator, to your question about the importance of FISA. So much of what the CIA has done and can do to support the U.S. government efforts to interrupt the drug trafficking rings and the places from which the precursor chemicals for those drugs come from. Our disruptions are often as a result of FISA-derived information. But you highlight an important point. You know, we talk about the threats from China and Russia and other adversaries overseas, but we, I think, all know and understand and acknowledge that that the failures in the integrity of our border has turned my home state of Texas as not only a border state, but every state into a border state. And that we have to make sure, and one of the things that, if confirmed, I want to talk about and pledge is the understanding that in addition to drug trafficking, I made a point about terrorists coming across our border, that we not lose sight of counterterrorism as something that the CIA needs to be focused on as we talk so much about the threat from China and Russia and the great power competition.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back 12 seconds. How about that for a gift?
Thank you. Senator Bennett, please follow Senator Lankford's example, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take Senator Lankford's 12 seconds. I'm just kidding. I want to congratulate you, Mr. Chairman, on taking this role. Thank you for that. And I want to thank the Vice Chairman for your leadership as chairman of this committee. I hope that we'll continue along with the standard that you set for all of us in terms of politics. Congressman Ratcliffe, it's good to see you again. Thank you for your visit to the office. I know you're a student of our history and a student of this committee. You know that this committee came out of a series of reforms that Congress put together because to deal with a really dark chapter in American history. There was some, Senator King from Maine talked about bad intelligence during Vietnam. There were instances of the CIA engaging in assassination plots abroad. It's hard to imagine today that that's even true. That provoked bipartisan outrage, and the reason this committee exists in part is not just to make the policy that you've been talking about and others this morning, but also to provide oversight on behalf of the American people and our colleagues who, as Senator Lankford were just saying, don't have access to the intelligence that the people on this committee have. I would just ask you to talk a little bit about your views on what the purpose of that congressional oversight is, and what, if you are confirmed to this position, what your responsibility to this committee will be.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. I enjoyed the chance to visit with you and talk about a number of issues. As you know from my background, I came from Congress. I was on an oversight committee, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And so I think it gives me a unique perspective. I brought that over as DNI, and if confirmed as CIA director, I have the perspective of both, the executive branch and the legislative branch. And I will confess that one of the things I was disappointed in was the fact that despite being on a congressional oversight committee over the intelligence communities, there was so much intelligence that I learned for the first time as DNI that I knew that no member of Congress was aware of. And I think that sort of speaks to my approach and understanding that I take seriously the obligation that I will have as, if confirmed as CIA director, to keep this committee fully and currently informed on intelligence issues. It's not that this committee or any intelligence committee or any oversight committee in Congress needs to know everything, but you should at least know the topics exist.
So let's talk about that a little bit, Congressman. I mean, the president gets his presidential daily brief every day. There's a very high standard for veracity for what's in that, because he has to obviously make the most significant decisions that any human has to make about deploying our defense assets or the other things that a president does. We don't have anything like that in Congress, and a lot of the time, it seems like we're often, as you said, finding ourselves fishing around in headlines and in the sort of less well organized intelligence materials that were provided with no assurance that it's a complete picture of anything. So I wonder, what your conclusion about that is, and how what the obligation of the CIA or any intelligence agency is with your leadership to be able to provide a fuller picture, the picture that you're talking about, that a member of Congress who's on these committees should actually know rather than be guessing about.
Well, my perspective is that you've highlighted all of the things that sort of reveal that our national security posture is impacted in a negative way when we're not communicating well between the branches of government, and particularly on sensitive national security matters. So I think a better informed Congress will allow for better national security decisions and keep the American people safe. So I'm open to a continuing dialogue about how I won't stand on traditions. This is traditionally what the CIA does or shares. I am open to, at the end of the day, we talk about the core mission of the CIA. It's to provide a decisive strategic advantage to you and to the president as policymakers. And so I don't view it as just informing the president. I view it as integral that I be informing you to provide that same strategic, decisive advantage.
I'm out of time. I appreciate very much the fulsomeness of your answer. I just want to observe that it's really easy for politicians to accuse the intelligence agencies of politicization. And actually, it's important that, we do that when it's an appropriate thing to do. But this is the place where that oversight is supposed to be provided. These are the people that are supposed to fix that problem. And it can only be done if we have people with integrity that are working at the heads of these agencies that can help us fix the problems, not just complain about it. And I hope we'll be able to work together to do that. Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe.
I look forward to it.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ratcliffe, first of all, thank you for your service to our country already. And to Michelle, thank you for the sacrifice which you also offer in allowing him to do this particular job in the future. I want to go back to the FISA Section 702 just a little bit. We're in an open session, and I think one of the opportunities that we have is to perhaps share with the American people with a little bit more clarity what 702 is really all about and what actually happens. Could you kind of describe in an approach that, look, it's coming up for renewal again in April of next year. And between now and then, we're going to have to convince the American people and other members of Congress that we've made significant improvements in the protections, but also we've done our best to try to explain why this is such an important part of, as a tool in our collection approach. Can you talk a little bit about the mechanics so that as those listen to you today, they understand what FISA 702 actually is and how it fits into the collection process?
Sure. Senator, thank you. I enjoyed the chance to visit with you, and I know we are like-minded in terms of the importance of 702, as I talked with Senator Langford, and how I view it as an indispensable tool. It's one that I used as a prosecutor, as General Ashcroft talked about, national security and terrorism-related investigations. So I've used it as a practical matter there, and then, like you, as a legislator, have seen it. But then in the unique perspective of as DNI, and if confirmed here, you know, the importance of it in fulfilling the core mission.
Well, let me
702, it allows for collecting foreign intelligence on foreign persons, not on U.S. persons. The controversy, why some people think that FISA is, no pun intended, a four-letter word, is that in the course of doing technical collection on foreign persons for foreign intelligence to make good decisions to keep our country safe, that sometimes U.S. persons are incidentally collected. In other words, they're having a conversation with a foreign person.
Yeah, look, we eavesdrop, don't we?
Yes.
And we're not eavesdropping on Americans. We're eavesdropping on people that are not American citizens, and we're doing it outside of our country.
That's right.
And in the middle of it, we have Americans that are sometimes caught up and maybe perhaps having a conversation with somebody outside the country.
That's right.
And at that point, there might have been something collected inadvertently. Can we use that?
So there is when, for instance, the CIA collects intelligence, it is allowable to do a U.S. person query where you're looking for someone that might be communicating with some foreign person to do something bad to the United States. What you can't have is accessing that or making a query for political reasons or for some reason other than protecting our national security. And so we have to have the safeguards to make sure that those kinds of abuses can't take place and be misused. And my pledge to you is, as if confirmed as CIA director, that won't happen. I will point out that I haven't been briefed on everything, but I am impressed with the CIA's compliance rate with regard to U.S. person queries is 99.6%, meaning they do a really good job of making sure that Americans who are swept up incidentally aren't having their civil liberties violated. Is it perfect? No, but we need to try.
There were reforms made based upon practices that were not appropriate several years ago. Is that a fair way of putting it? But they've already been addressed now.
That's correct.
And so you would be supportive of the renewal of 702, and perhaps there are some additional considerations, but at this point, it is critical that we get it renewed.
It's critical, it's indispensable, and for critics of it, no one has offered a replacement. If for instance, half of the actionable foreign intelligence comes from FISA 702, what are we going to replace that with? And the critics haven't provided any alternative to that. And so.
No, and look, I agree. I just thought it would be important in this open setting that there be a better understanding, or at least a better clarification, just how critical it is and what it really is. It's basically looking at things overseas, not in the United States.
And I think it's going to be an iterative, ongoing discussion, and needs to be as it comes up for reauthorization again. And it'll be incumbent on me, if confirmed, to both within the administration and outside, stress the things that you and I are talking about and make sure that people understand, and to dispel false narratives about how FISA is being misused or can be misused.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe, for your service. Thank you for meeting with me. We had an excellent conversation about a number of our priorities on the committee, but mine specifically. Pandemic preparedness was one issue, AHIs, which Senator Collins covered very effectively, and sexual assault and harassment in the military. So I just want to address those so you can talk about them publicly. As we discussed, we need to do a much better job in detecting and preventing and knowing the intelligence to prepare for the next pandemic. We didn't have the type of collaboration we needed to prepare for COVID. We had disagreements about how COVID began, and we never really got resolution on that, which is a concern for me. But this idea of a One Health proposal is creating essentially a fusion center for the CIA, the NSA, the DOD, the Department of Agriculture, and HHS, so that you are in real time working collaboratively to detect this information, because agriculture and science they often share data and information, and we know with regard to the Wuhan lab that they were publishing data and information about the tests they were doing. The scientific community had access to that. The CIA, on the other hand, was looking into other intelligence. They might have been able to get the details about illnesses quicker than anyone else. But none of these groups were talking, so the data wasn't shared in a timely basis. And so we didn't really have the information we could have had if the CIA was talking to the medical community, the scientific community, and the agriculture community in terms of research. So I just want your commitment that you will work with me on this very important issue, because the CIA can play such a meaningful role in protecting our nation from such other threats, such as a pandemic or any use of a biological weapon or any use of that kind of harm to the United States.
Senator Gillibrand, I really did enjoy the chance to visit and talk about these issues. I agree completely. I do pledge to work with you on that. You know, we go back to one of the worst incidents in our nation's history, 9/11. It was a failure of communication. We had the intelligence, we just weren't sharing it with each other in a way that would prevent that. And you brought up COVID, and is the more recent example where maybe as many as 25 million people die worldwide, and at least 1 million Americans as a result of that. And one of the things when I came in as DNI, to your point, was I was surprised at the lack of coordination between, for instance, the intelligence community and health agencies like the CDC and the NIH, and the ability to, the channels were not open to share information like you're talking about. So many of these things can be, if not prevented, mitigated quickly if we're communicating and sharing intelligence better. So I completely agree with the sentiment that you've expressed, and look forward to working with you to make sure that we're doing those things if I'm confirmed as CIA director.
Thank you. And I just want to associate myself with the comments of Senator Collins with regard to AHIs. I think it is essential, as I mentioned in our hearing, that you collaborate with the Department of Defense, with their intelligence agencies, to understand what the nature of these effects are, what causes them, and what type of adversaries could be using technology in a way to actually harm our service members. So I just really appreciate that you will commit to delving deep into this issue and really try to limit the siloing of information between CIA and DOD on this very topic.
I will. I look forward to it. You know, the CIA is the premier intelligence agency in the world, and I'm not saying that it should always be able to make an assessment about cause, but over time, that's typically something that we should expect and in some cases demand. And, you know, for instance, COVID, you brought up that's one issue, but AHI is another one. I'm curious and look forward to reading the classified version of the AHI in terms of the assessments that were made or the inability to make an assessment on causation. And if I'm not satisfied, we'll continue to look at that.
And my last question, obviously the scourge of sexual assault is problematic in every area of society. We want to make sure that the CIA is a safe place to work and that people who are being harassed or assaulted can come forward and demand justice. I just ask your commitment that you'll work with this committee to make sure all of our members of this community can work in a safe environment.
I will, Senator. I appreciate your leadership on this issue. I know it's been something you've highlighted, and as we talked about in our meeting, over the course of my career, I'm grateful for what my record reflects in leadership positions I've had and organizations I've had in terms of not tolerating sexual assault and sexual abuse. When I was U.S. Attorney, when I was DNI, when I was in Congress, all of those. And so I make that pledge to you gratefully.
Senator Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to serve with you and other members of this committee. Mr. Ratcliffe, had a nice visit with you in the office. You answered many of my questions. What I'll ask you here today will be familiar to you and build on that meeting. Thank you again for your willingness to serve your country. You are prepared, I think, for this this step, this position. You're qualified. I anticipate supporting your nomination, so we'll begin with that. You spoke in your testimony to the growing role of emerging technology and to advances being made by our adversaries. If confirmed, how will you direct the agency to analyze and respond to foreign threats that undermine often overlooked but critical areas of our security and economic well-being, such as the food and ag sectors?
So thank you for the question. I did enjoy our visit, Senator Young, and enjoyed serving with you in the House of Representatives. And if confirmed, look forward to working with you from this perspective. You know, we were just talking. I was talking with Senator Gillibrand about COVID-19, the origins of that, and the things that the intelligence community needs to do to be better. Part of that is, to your point, embracing emerging technologies and making sure that one of the things that the CIA does is adapt to the technology curve. So, for instance, when we talk about utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's so much data that's out there in this, you know, great technological age that we live in, that sometimes the intelligence community spends so much time sifting through the data that they can't find the signal for the noise. And one of the things that technology allows us to do is to find the signal in all of that noise. In other words, so that we can find the intelligence, spend more time using the intelligence and less time looking for it. And so you brought up, you know, different issues where that can be valuable, I know, and where that can be helpful. One of the things that I know you're interested in and that we've talked about was, you know, the biosecurity and the biointelligence issues, and how the CIA needs to expand its authorities in that regard, and its relationships with scientists and researchers to be on the leading edge of information as it's coming out, and to develop early warnings to some of the problems that we're talking about in that space.
Well, I'm encouraged that you are thinking critically about this topic, and it's clear to me you are. You should know, as you're likely aware, but all others who are watching this should know, that there has been commissioned by Congress a National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology. And that commission is charged with looking at the national security implications of our current biotech leadership, but also making recommendations to make sure that the United States can stay ahead of our adversaries, in particular China. And so we'll produce those recommendations in the spring time frame. I'm chairman of that commission currently, and some of those will implicate very directly our intelligence community. And so I would just ask that you and your staff review that report when it's published, and work with this committee and others on some of its recommendations. So do you commit yourself, without having seen the report, but to be attentive to its recommendations and findings?
I absolutely do, and I appreciate your leadership on that issue. And as we talked about, and we'll talk about more, I look forward to supporting and collaborating your efforts in that regard.
Thank you. Time is winding down, and I'm the new guy, but one other quick question here. Would you like to volunteer any particular approaches that you might want to lead the agency in to delay or degrade the threats posed by foreign nations using emerging technologies like AI or biotech?
I think we can talk about some of those things in the classified session, Senator. I think that what I would say in this setting is that when it comes to technology, we have so much concern about China and Russia and our adversaries and what they're doing and how we need to counter them. I have absolute confidence that we can and will. You know, there's only one country in the world that can parallel park a 200-foot rocket booster. The Chinese can't do it. The Russians can't do it. We do it, and we do it in part because of the great collaboration we have and can have and need to deepen between the private sector, where there's so much innovation and ingenuity in the space of emerging technologies. And I'm committed as CIA director, if allowed to, expanding upon that.
Thank you. Chairman.
Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Ratcliffe, congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for your service to the country. Congratulations also to your family. I enjoyed our engagement a few weeks ago. It was a useful opportunity for me to learn more about your views and your plans for CIA. I want to begin with a matter that impacts Georgia. On Election Day 2024, there were a series of bomb threats issued against polling places in DeKalb County, Georgia, principally. Predominantly black, predominantly Democratic-leaning precincts that disrupted election operations and the ability of folks to vote in the afternoon on Election Day. Our state election officials attributed those threats to Russian actors. What assurance can you give my constituents in Georgia that CIA will sustain collection to identify threats to voting rights and election administration in the United States?
So thank you, Senator, for the question. I enjoyed our visit as well. I can give every assurance. As you know, the CIA doesn't have domestic authorities. When we talk about election security issues, the FBI and DHS are the agencies that provide that protection. Where the CIA plays a role is if we have bad actors who want to influence or impact our elections, as you've related in this case. I haven't seen that specific intelligence, but that for instance, Russian actors were behind those threats. Those are the kinds of things that the CIA not only should do, but must do, and frankly do better in terms of collecting intelligence on how our adversaries intend, whether it's through physical means or through a cyber means of disrupting or influencing elections. You know, the CIA's role should be to identify those threats over there before they come over here.
Thank you for that commitment to sustain that collection. I appreciate it. I want to give you the opportunity to provide some clarifying information about events that have attracted some scrutiny in September of 2020 when you sent a letter to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee which declassified certain intelligence about Russian analytic products that have been collected by the intelligence community and which pertain to events 4 years past during the 2016 election and the controversy over alleged links between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. My purpose is not to interrogate, to relitigate that ancient history from 2016, but to understand why you chose to send that letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee declassifying intelligence on that day, September 29th. You will no doubt recall that that was the same day as the presidential debate, yes?
I don't recall that it was that date, but it may be.
You don't recall? Your testimony is that you're not aware that that letter was sent to the Judiciary Committee by you on the same day as the presidential debate?
I didn't recall that it was on that date. I mean, I'll take you at your word. The dates will reflect what they are. But to your question,
let me just, I want to drill down on that for a moment, because my purpose here is not to suggest some kind of political intent, but you've made it very clear that avoiding the politicization of the intelligence community's activities is a high priority for you. Is that correct?
Correct.
It strikes me that releasing politically sensitive intelligence, that you'd think carefully about the timing of that you might consider that doing so on the day of a presidential debate, when this was intelligence collected 4 years in the past, might reasonably draw the question of whether or not there was some political impetus. Is that reasonable?
It's reasonable for you to ask that, and if I can, you asked me to clarify if I can do that. So you're correct. It was my decision, but it wasn't my process. So to your point, that effort was actually the request of this committee during my my confirmation hearing as DNI, was to go back and look at the intelligence from 2016 and the 2017 intelligence community assessment. I also received separately a request from the Attorney General and from then special counsel to declassify certain intelligence relating to that in support of what would be a public report from the special counsel. I, in addition to that, received what I would call requests or even demands from other Senate committees, to include the Judiciary Committee and the House the Senate Homeland Security and Government Accountability, whatever the title of that committee is, for information related to that. That took place over a course of several months, and the process, just so you're clear, was an iterative, collaborative process that included the Attorney General, the CIA Director, the Director of the NSA, myself as DNI, and again, an iterative process that resulted in a highly redacted product to protect sources and methods, but yet to respond to these requests or demands to put that information out. So I take
that's useful information, and my time is running short, but we can discuss further in the closed session if we need to. I appreciate you answering the question,
very much look forward
and again,
to that.
enjoyed our recent meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Ratcliffe, I think I have the distinction of having known you longer than anybody else on this committee. I remember when you were
they call that misfortune.
When you were the mayor of Heath, Texas.
Don't date me.
How many people live in Heath, Texas?
Around 7,000.
Okay. You still live there with your wife and
I do.
family?
It's
All
a
right.
great community.
It is.
I say hi to all the heathens out there.
Absolutely. So I have every confidence that you will do an outstanding job as the next director of the CIA, and I say that advisedly because, as I said, I've known you for a long time and watched your career from the private sector to a U.S. attorney, acting U.S. attorney for a while, to member of Congress, and I had the privilege of introducing you to the committee at your previous confirmation hearing as Director of National Intelligence. So I don't really have any doubt about your qualifications. I do want to talk about a couple of subjects, and one is, I know people have heard the discussion of FISA and Section 702, and I appreciate the clarity with which you have explained how essential this tool is. And I think part of the problem we've had with reauthorization is people don't trust the people actually implementing that tool because they've seen the abuses by members of the IC, including the FBI, particularly dating back during President Trump's administration. So they figure, well, everybody must misuse these tools. But I thought you had a great analogy when we discussed this on the phone. You said, well, you probably have a bunch of steak knives in your kitchen, and they can be used for a useful and beneficial purpose, but they could also be misused. And I think that was a pretty good analogy. But I want to ask you about one of the, quote, fixes that some people have suggested to the current state of the law, and that is to require a warrant to query lawfully collected FISA information. You have properly identified the fact that this is directed at people overseas, foreigners overseas, not Americans. But you're a former U.S. attorney and a pretty good lawyer, and you understand what probable cause requires. To be able to establish probable cause in front of a judge, you need to have evidence. And if all you have is a FISA query of a foreign target that happens to mention an American citizen or a U.S. person, is there any way for you to go to court and establish the requirements of a warrant or probable cause in order to query that that data?
Well, Senator, you know the answer to that better than I do because you're a better lawyer and we're an attorney general. But the answer is no, because the danger there is that you really don't have the information to obtain the warrant. And the process of obtaining the warrant, we're talking about national security issues where sometimes minutes matter in the ability to disrupt or interdict the bad actors or to act upon the intelligence that you can gain from that. And so the process of even getting a warrant, the time that it takes, much less the fact that, as you say, you won't have a probable cause basis to get there.
Well, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation about how FISA works. And admittedly, I have to go back periodically and refresh my own memory because it does get to be fairly convoluted sometimes. But the fact of the matter is it's illegal to use this tool to spy on American citizens. And there are protocols in place to lessen the likelihood that that could ever possibly occur. But again, I think basically what's happened is there's been a lack of trust in the people who had access to those tools in the recent past, and I hope you will help restore that trust. I also think you're going to need to share your experience and your wisdom with the nominees for FBI and National Director of National Security, because we've had these conversations as well, and I think there's some confusion about whether a warrant should be required or not. I think you're absolutely right, and that is, I think, is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your new job. Look forward to working with you on this committee. And Mr. Ratcliffe, congratulations to your nomination for this position, and congratulations to your family as well. I want to follow up on what Senator Ossoff was referring to, the intelligence that was released prior to the 2020 election. That intelligence was rejected. First of all, it was before I was on the committee, but my understanding is it was rejected by Democrats and Republicans on this committee as having no factual basis, and it put Russian disinformation into the public sphere. I just want to understand, so just like in hindsight, knowing what you know now, and this is 4 years removed from that, and we've had another election, and obviously we've got challenges we face with Russian and Chinese, Iranian disinformation in our politics. So in hindsight, are there any changes that you would make to the way you handled that information?
Well, Senator, I appreciate the question. You know, I certainly, looking back, having an opportunity to change certain things might do that. I don't know in this case. For instance, Senator Ossoff raised the point that the declassification occurred on the day of a presidential election. I don't recall that. Obviously, that's when it did, but
I think he said debate.
Yeah. Debate. I'm sorry. Yeah, debate. You know, I wasn't aware of that. I certainly don't think I did everything perfectly in terms of making decisions about every issue that relates to, I'm talking generally, but I talked about my record in terms of how I approach these things and how, in terms of speaking truth to power, which sometimes includes declassifying information. Most of the things that I've done, Senator, aged very well, and you know, and I think others will continue to. For instance, on COVID origins, you know, I think that ultimately, I believe that there will be an assessment that is consistent with the position that I've taken. So.
Well, it's hard to get this stuff exactly right. I get that. This is complicated. In this case, you know, it did become rather political, and I appreciate your willingness to look back.
So the other thing I want to say is, because I want to, part of my answer to your question is classified. And I look forward in the classified session to talking about one of the things this committee asked me to do that did influence my decision was to look at the 2017 intelligence community assessment. And in not only looking at that, what I did, so to be clear, was I requested a briefing from the CIA, from some members of the team that were involved in that. And I'm not sure that information or that intelligence has been shared with this committee. So I look forward to.
Yeah, let's follow up on that. I've got a few more things I want to cover here, and I've got about 90 seconds left here. In your written response to the committee, you indicated, this is a different topic, you agreed with the Trump administration's 2018 assessment that the Assad regime used chemical weapons, including in Douma, killing hundreds, injuring hundreds more. The U.S. intelligence community had a similar assessment that these weapons were used. If you're serving, or when you're serving as the director and the DNI asks you to explore evidence that the Douma or other attacks were staged, or that analysis indicating the use of chemical weapons is incorrect, or there's some kind of similar situation, what would you do?
Well, look at the intelligence. So you're right. I did include that. That was based upon the intelligence that I was able to review during my time as DNI. And I think the intelligence was clear. I think the assessments were, I forget if they were with high confidence, but I believe that they were. What I haven't seen is any intelligence in the last 4 years that I wouldn't have had access to. So I would look at that, but I'd be surprised if there is intelligence that would change my initial assessment, but I'll certainly go back and look at that.
And can I just very briefly have just a few more seconds here? I just want to get your commitment to work with me, focusing on transnational criminal organizations on the other side of the border. It's a big problem. It affects my state in a big way.
And my state, and I absolutely make that pledge and look forward to working with you to address that threat.
All right, thank you.
Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Ratcliffe, I enjoyed and appreciated our conversation in the office. I particularly appreciated the indication of your transparency with this committee, your forthrightness, telling us the truth. It's been difficult from time to know what the true story is, and there are opinions about truth, but we ought to be trying to find the truth. I want to ask you about statements that you've made. I agree with you that China is the greatest threat facing our country. I rate Russia as our second gravest threat and believe it's the most acute threat today. Will you describe the scope of the threat as you see it and the importance of countering the Kremlin?
The question, the threat from Russia?
Threat from Russia. So you indicate China is the first greatest threat.
Absolutely. So Russia is very clearly an adversary of the United States. The threat, of course, is a country with a very large nuclear stockpile. The thing that separates the threat from Russia from China, in my mind, and why I put them, even though we include them in the great power competition, is that the United States is the largest economy in the world. China's the second largest. Russia has an economy that's roughly the same size as my home state of Texas. So what that means is that the Russians have to decide where they're going to compete with the United States. And so they've chosen areas like hypersonics and other areas, but that comes at a cost. And I think we saw some of the cost in terms of their troop readiness as they engaged in their aggression against Ukraine. So a dangerous, lethal adversary who, in many respects, is because of the limitations that I've talked about, has focused on areas where there are great equalizers, and one of those is cybersecurity. So countries that can't compete with the United States in terms of kinetic firepower across the board, which can do so through cyber means. In other words, and we see that with Iran and North Korea and other countries who can't compete with us kinetically, focus on cyber means to cause us harm. Russia certainly falls into that category as well in terms of where a lot of their focus is, and my assessment of them in terms of the malign activities that they take across against the U.S.
Certainly, invasion of another country has significantly complicated the security of our allies and perhaps the United States. Let me point out that you're the first Texan I have ever met that belittled the state of Texas. In your answers to the committee's questionnaire, you state regarding Russia that you believe, I'm quoting you, believe that we cannot let our adversarial relationship boil over into unintended wars. And you go on to say, I will advise the president when there are opportunities to work toward mutually beneficial outcomes with Russia. You did not make a similar commitment for China, Iran, or North Korea. What's the difference?
I don't recall the context of the question why there would be a difference. For instance, I think what I was referring to there, Senator, was for all of the things that I talk about in terms of Russia as a threat and the things that where they challenge us with malign activity, there are areas where we, for instance, countering terrorism, some of the same threats that we face from terrorist groups are threats that they face. And so there are occasions where information or intelligence can be shared or things can be done in our mutual, to the mutual benefit of our countries in those types of things. That would be true with China as well. You know, I think President Trump's approach from a policy standpoint is to not look for conflict with anyone, including our adversaries, but to provide a strong deterrent effect to their malign activities through America's strength, through peace through strength. So I think Iran may be different in the sense of it is a terrorist state, a terrorist regime, or had been designated by the Trump administration, and so I would put that in a different category.
In addressing the importance of analytical objectivity and speaking truth to power, you state that as the DNI, you represented the IC's analysis to policymakers faithfully, including dissenting views, even when the full analytical picture was unpopular. Could you give me an example?
Sure. In connection with the 2020 presidential election, assessment was made as to whether China was trying to undermine President Trump's reelection efforts, and there was a split between the community. A majority opinion was that China was not doing that, wouldn't do that for a number of reasons. The minority opinion was that they were. I agreed with the minority opinion, but what I did was not try to substitute my judgment for the community. I wrote a dissent that would be public and people could see the reasons for that, and in the process supported a whistleblower, one of our leading cyber officers, in support of that position. I will say that 15 months later, FBI Director Wray held a press conference talking about the exact things that I was saying China had engaged in that they were doing. And so the opinion that China would never engage in those kind of activities proved to be false, and I think that my dissent aged well.
Not only did you speak out against the majority, but you turned out to be right. Thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. On July 21st of 2020, you sent a letter to this committee stating that while you agreed to appear at the committee's open worldwide threat hearing as DNI, as Director of National Intelligence, that you would not take any questions in open session. And you wrote that letter despite committing twice in your confirmation hearing that you would appear and answer questions. So obviously, this position is one that requires congressional oversight. And I don't think any of us up here would ever ask you to answer questions in a way that revealed anything that was classified or was more appropriate for closed session. So I want to ask you why you thought that was appropriate, and then today, can you commit that if confirmed, you will appear at this committee's annual open hearing on worldwide threats and take questions from the committee itself?
Senator, thanks for the question. I think there was a slight mischaracterization that I didn't refuse. I made a proposal about how to handle the worldwide threats hearing. I did that for a number of reasons. First of all, I did it at that time as DNI, which, as you know, the DNI speaks for the entire intelligence community. My proposal was actually a reflection of multiple leaders across the intelligence community who shared my opinion that other countries don't hold public hearings like that where we discuss sensitive national security information. And the problem isn't in terms of you asking questions about classified material. The issue comes up in terms of being put on the spot to provide an answer where sometimes you might inadvertently provide information that is classified because you don't recall whether it's at what level or if it's classified at all. So that's the danger, and that has happened. So that explains how I approach that issue. What I would say is this, I'm being considered for the CIA director, which is not the head of the intelligence community. And I understand, notwithstanding my opinion about how the worldwide threat assessment hearing should take place, that the committee, and I learned from that, disagrees, didn't want that proposal. So that would not be an issue if I'm confirmed as CIA director.
So you will come and take
Yes.
appropriate questions?
Yes.
Let me ask you, and you answered, Mr. Ratcliffe, this question in writing, but I think it's important for the American people and frankly for the world to hear your answer in an open hearing as well. Section 1045 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2016 prohibited the use of any interrogation technique that was not authorized in the Army Field Manual. Will you abide by this law?
Yes.
In your answers to the committee questions, you wrote that the CIA must, and this is a quote from you, CIA must help rebuild public confidence in the intelligence community in the wake of prior abuses, end quote. And you reference that on a number of different occasions in your answers. So I've frankly never been one to shy away from criticizing either the IC or the CIA when I felt it was appropriate. But I think most of us up here can agree that on the whole, the CIA's men and women produce the finest intelligence in the world with a great deal of objectivity and integrity. And if there is a lack of public confidence, it's because it's become too easy for some elected officials to throw around terms like the deep state. So if you're confirmed, what precisely would you do to help rebuild public confidence in the agency, and where do you see that necessary and appropriate?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. I think it's the things that we've talked about already, and some of it you may not have been present for, but in terms of leading by example, if confirmed as the CIA director, I went through a series of examples where I talked about speaking truth to power and the importance of that and setting the right example in connection with that. So I think that's essentially how I would go about it, is to lead by example.
Thanks, Chairman. I believe the Vice Chairman has a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also, one quick thing I want to mention was I appreciate your answer to Senator Heinrich's question about appearance here. I think we do have a unique situation in America where we have public congressional oversight. I think it's critically important to help restore that trust, and I appreciate your commitment to appear and testify. And this topic I'm going to raise in closed, but I wanted to also at least get you out, get you on the opening, and think you will concur. Senator Cotton, the chairman pointed out a number of times when the IC didn't get it right over recent times. And I think, I'm not sure we'll ever get an all-seeing IC, but one area that I've been particularly concerned about is the ability for the IC to monitor technology advancement. I think historically that has not been the case. You know, we've told our spies to go spy on the military or foreign governments, but we see repeatedly as we think about this technology competition, particularly with China, and I can cite chapter and verse from CIA getting it wrong about how SMIC was going to be able to move to lower level semiconductors or smaller semiconductors, area after area. I think under Rebecca Burns' administration, we've moved the enterprise some. I think we've still got a lot more to do, but I did want you in this public setting to weigh in on your thoughts on how it is absolutely critical that the CIA is able to not only look at our adversaries in terms of government and military presence, but clearly in this technology competition and how we have to up our game in terms of collection.
Yeah, agree 100% completely. You talked about it, Senator, earlier in terms of, you know, military threats are one thing, but, you know, as you know, I believe, for instance, the NSA, you know, we have the best code makers and code breakers in the world, but if China gets to quantum computing before we do, that causes a real problem. We've got to win the war, the race on technology, stay ahead of the technology curve, and part of that is when we talk about, you know, technology as a tool and a target is we've got to disrupt. CIA has to play a really important role in disrupting our adversaries' technologies in terms of trying to get ahead of us. So you mentioned semiconductors. We all know that, you know, the issue that relates to, you know, Taiwan and that 95% of, you know, advanced semiconductors are there, and we're trying to address those supply chain issues. But we can do things, and the CIA must do things to disrupt how our adversaries are dealing with their supply chain issues in regard to that. That's just one example.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. For the information of senators, we intend to hold a committee vote on Mr. Ratcliffe's nomination as soon as possible, most likely on Monday afternoon. Therefore, any member who wishes to submit questions for the record after today's hearing, please do so by close of business tomorrow. Mr. Ratcliffe, I presume we can expect you to provide your replies even more promptly. Thank you all. The open session of this hearing is adjourned. We will reconvene in closed session in 30 minutes. That will be at 12:37 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got to get up. 12:37, not 12:30. What's that exact? Is that an Are we supposed to eat?
Is E&R still going?
Are we eating in the